All right, here we go. Friday stand up. Yuri, we talked about doing something a little bit different every other week on the Friday, which for me, and admittedly, painfully admitting, I'm getting old. The thing that came to mind for me was an episode of Seinfeld where they talk about this is a show about nothing, or they come up with the idea of a new TV show as a TV show about nothing, um, kind of making fun of themselves. That was what came into mind for me. Is this is the episode about nothing?
Yeah, let's make it about nothing then. But in a much more real sense, maybe to quote Michael Scott, for those of you who understand office references, his quote, and I knew exactly what to do, but in a much more real sense, I had no idea what to do. So this will be about nothing and not knowing what to do. How's that sound?
Very, yeah, very. Let's not put that in any marketing material
Yeah,
anywhere, huh?
yeah. Hey, but I have a question for you. So I was thinking, we're always in the weeds, and one of the things I'd want to ask you, Brian. So, in your mind, do you consider busyness a flex? Because I hear people talk about how busy they are all the time in the cybersecurity space, in the tech space, and anytime you call them or you need something, it's like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time for this. And I've been guilty of it as well. What are your thoughts there?
This maybe just turned into, turned from a 10 or 15-minute stand up into a 4-hour lecture. Uh, I have a lot of thoughts. Uh, Man, where to begin? I would say there's probably a few main points if I think through and focus. What are the key points there? One, I think that that's something that people just say. And it's not to say we're all busy at times. We all have lots to do. We've all had days of like 8 hours of meetings back to back, and we've got 4 deliverables we need to finish. We all have that kind of stuff. Or most of us do, at least once in a while, not necessarily every day, but at least once in a while, people have those kinds of days. And I think that it's almost like a bad habit where
Hmm.
it's like somebody asks you for something and their first response is, man, I'm so busy, because they want you to know that they're doing work. So it's almost, I think, at times like a self-defense mechanism. I don't want people to think I'm not working really hard, so I'm just going to tell them I'm so busy,
Right.
whether you're actually busy or not. I think that's one issue. Two, I think it allows you, kind of getting into the human psychology a little bit, it allows you to make, like, so if you came to me and said, hey Brian, can you help me with this thing, and I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, now you owe me a favor, I'm doing something special for you, like I'm taking time out of my busy day. Also thinking about Michael Scott, when there's the episode where he's talking about how busy he is and he's in there playing with his like truck on his desk, and he's like, so busy, busy, busy. But now you owe me a favor, right? Because I'm so busy, but I'm going to take time out of my super busy day to help you because you asked for it. So I think there's an element there where it allows me to gain favor in a
Yeah.
way that if I was sitting around doing nothing and you came and asked me for help, well, I'm doing nothing, so fine, whatever. It's not as much of a favor, from me to you. So I think that plays an element in it. I think the biggest piece in this, though, those things are important, and I think they're all part of it. But the last thing I would say on it, to try and keep this in a reasonable length of time, and I wrote a book a few years back, and I actually talk about this some in the book. There's a difference between effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. One, and two, when you talk about productivity, the way I think about productivity is it's just a measure of outputs. It's how much are you actually producing, but you could be producing the wrong things. So I really make the distinction between, are you being effective and are you being productive? Because a lot of people fool themselves into thinking they're being super valuable when in reality they're being super busy on the wrong things. And so that's where I separate the idea of effectiveness, which is, are you doing the right thing? And then, are you being productive? How much are you actually doing?
Yeah.
So I think when people talk about being super busy, that in and of itself to me is not a flex, because you could be super busy doing the wrong stuff, adding no value to your organization. And then it's like, so what? It doesn't matter. You're working 14-hour days. You're trying to dig a coal mine in Seattle, which is an absolute complete waste of time, because you're not doing anything that's going to actually produce any value.
So what I hear you saying is it doesn't matter how fast you're running if it's in the wrong direction, right? So
Yeah,
don't be running enthusiastically in the wrong direction, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And we can all relate to those, those clips where, it's a soccer game or a football game and the kid is running in the wrong direction, right? To score a goal for the other team, right? And so I think, I can relate with that as well, because oftentimes we feel like, oh, if our calendar's full, we're productive, and that's not necessarily true. And I like how you said it's a defense mechanism, because I think a lot of people are oftentimes wanting to be heard or seen, and if they say, "Oh, I'm just so busy, I've got so much to do," I think they feel maybe they feel a little bit more valued in saying that, because it's like, "Oh, without me, this company is gonna
It's
crash
a
and burn."
self-validation
Yeah,
to say, oh, I'm so busy and I'm so important to this organization because my calendar's full.
yeah,
But if you go and look, I mean, I feel like this, even, last week I had a day full of meetings. And at the end of the day, I went back and looked and I was like, what value did I actually add? Not much. I went and sat in a bunch of meetings and pointed out a couple of things. And if you looked at my calendar, you would think, man, I'm so busy today. But it's like, I felt at the end of the day, it was like, man, I didn't do a great job today adding value to the world.
yeah.
And that's where it gets back to like separating out the idea of busyness or productivity and effectiveness.
Yeah, and maybe even focusing on the vital few, which is a topic for a future episode. But like, what are the vital few in your job, or what are the vital few things that really matter to the business, right? Focusing on those. Speaking about Zoom, I remember when COVID just hit, my wife's like, "What are you doing all day in the room?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a new title, and my title is I'm the, principal Zoom attendee. I just sit in Zoom meetings all day." I sit in Zoom meetings all day, and you're busy, but you're not being, effective, right? So,
Yeah, I'll tell another quick story. This was, kids can be a great gauge at times because they don't have a filter,
yeah,
and they will often say things not thinking about, what's proper or what are the consequences. They'll just say whatever they're thinking. And
right.
I had a take your kids to work day. This was when my kids were much younger. They were about, I want to say 8 and 6, roughly. So still very much in the age of no filters. And I took them to work, and you try and do some nice things when you do that. So maybe things you don't do every day. So like, we went and we stopped and we got donuts on the way in, which I don't ever do in a normal work day, but that I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go. We got some donuts. They sat in my office and watched me on a couple of calls. And I don't remember exactly the nature of the calls, but I remember they were projects that were not going well. And so I was pretty heated on the calls. I was had a raised voice, which I don't usually do. Like like even when I'm upset or angry, like I don't really yell. I was getting pretty loud and fired up in these meetings though, because it was like, guys, what are we doing? This is not working. We need to do something different. And
Right.
after a couple hours, I know this is going long, but it's like, hey, you guys want to go get lunch? And we went and we had like pizza for lunch at a pizza place and came back. And after that, just I had to go and just check in on my team because I was managing a fairly large team. So they went with me as I walked around and just checked in on team members. And at the end of the day, they were like, we go back and they start telling my wife, their mom, oh, dad's job is so awesome. We went and we ate donuts and then he yelled at some people for a while. And then we went and ate lunch and then we just walked around and talked to people and we didn't actually do any work.
Yeah.
And I was like, that hurt, man. Like that was a
Yeah.
knife. I was like, what do you mean we did? Like, ouch.
Cue the line, I'm a people person, right? From Office Space.
Yeah. I'm good at dealing with people.
Yeah.
So I mean, and they were partially right,
Yeah.
and a little bit of it was I was doing stuff I wouldn't normally do. Some of it was they didn't actually understand what was going on. And some of it was they were, partially right in that some of what I was doing had the guise of productivity, but in reality, was it the most effective use of my time? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, and one of the things I found, and that's a good funny story. And kids are not, politically correct in any sense. They just say it like it is, right? One of the things I found is, I've worked with some people who are top performers, right? They in their area, they are very effective. And one guy I've worked with, he's always working after hours, weekends. He just loves what he does, but he's always approachable. It's never like, hey, no, I'm too busy. I've got too much going on. And to me, that's super refreshing, right? That's a sign of a leader, right? Even if you are busy, even if you've got a lot going on, but being approachable and knowing that at the end of the day, it's about people, right? And it's about the mission of the company and not about our individual, like, hey, we've got to meet 5 times today and do ABC, right? So that's something. And another thing is, I've worked for some pretty great bosses in the past. And one boss at a company, she would say, hey, when we would have our one-on-ones, it would be like, hey, there's this new project. And she would say, well, what are you going to put down to pick this up? Right. And I appreciated that because she understood that, like, hey, for me to pick something else up, a new project or whatnot, there's only so much time in a day. And to be effective and to focus, you can't do it all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I really appreciated that is, managers who understand that if you add additional items to your employees, they've got to prioritize, right? And they can't do it all if you just keep stacking. So.
Yeah, I can give one more. I'll try and make it quick story. So this was, again, earlier in my career. I took a job and, a few months in, I was like, man, is this it? Like, this is kind of cake,
Right.
And I remember meeting with one of my peers and he was like, very similar mindset. Man, I'm so busy. I got so much going on. There's so many things to do. I got no time for anything. You're probably feeling the same, huh? Now that you've been here for a few months. And I'm like, no, like I'm not. Like, this job is easy, man. Why are you working so hard? And, we started to compare notes a little bit. I'm like, let me, like, let's talk about what you're doing, because that's just kind of who I am. I'm like, how are you working? Like, help me understand what you're doing day to day that's got you so tied up. And as we went through and we looked at like what he was actually doing and how he was doing it, he was being super inefficient, which goes back. That was the third pillar in the book, was the efficiency part. So yes, the volume of work he was doing was significant, but he was very inefficient in how he was working. And so he was being super busy, but the amount of energy he was putting in versus the outputs that he was getting out were way out of whack. And I was actually getting more out of working less because I was being much more efficient with my time.
Yeah.
And so the overall combination of effectiveness and productivity, like I had him beat. Like I was producing more of the effective things in less time because of how I was focusing and working efficiently. So that's another thing when I hear about people like, oh, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. It's like, well, what are you over engineering in your day? You know, what is your 1 hour meeting that could be a 20-minute meeting? Or what is your 30-minute meeting that could have been an email or a Slack message? It's those types of things that can also make a person say that they're really busy when it's like, no, you're not busy. You're just inefficient.
Yeah. And every time you context switch, you lose that efficiency, right? If you're going back and forth and you have a
That's,
distraction
yeah,
here.
context switching is one of the things that every time you do it, you lose minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to have an episode in the future about what are the right things to do in cybersecurity, right? Because I know a lot of folks who are super busy, and I think there's something to be said about, what are things you can automate or just stop doing altogether because they don't matter, right?
Hey,
So,
that's always a tactic to try is, although, you got to be careful. You can't do this about everything. And, if it comes to like patching a server, you don't want to say, hey, but just stop doing some things and see
yeah,
who complains.
right.
That's a tactic I've taken in my career where it's, not that long ago, I had a team member he was so tired of producing this weekly status report. And I was like, hey, let's just not make it and see who complains. And he quit making it and nobody complained
Yeah,
and it was 6 months later. And finally one person was like, hey, I haven't seen a status report. Are you guys still making those? It took 6 months for somebody to
right,
recognize. And even then they didn't really want the status report. They just were curious about why we weren't doing it. And they still were.
right, right. Yeah,
So, if you have some things and it's not going to put the company at risk, try not doing them.
yeah, yeah.
Stop doing them for a while and see who complains.
Or figure out a way to automate it.
I would argue against that, the efficiency nerd in me, because then
Yeah,
you're going to build a system to automate a thing that adds no value. And now somebody's
right.
got to maintain that thing, and that it will carry on into the future. You leave your organization and there'll be this automated thing there that everybody continues to maintain and nobody knows why.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
when the
Fair point.
Bobs come in and say, what would you say you do here? Oh, well, I maintain the thing.
Right.
Well, what does the thing do? Well, it was here when I got here. Okay, well, what's its purpose? Well, I don't know. I was just told not to let it go down.
Yeah, I think Elon Musk is huge, and it's a separate topic, right? Whatever you think of Elon Musk, but that's one of his big things is like questioning on the Tesla assembly lines, like, show me the person who made this requirement, right? Is it
Yeah.
needed? And
Yeah.
actually distilling things down, processes and whatnot to the very essence. Because there's probably, if you audit your day, there's probably a lot of things you can get rid of that would make
Yeah.
you more efficient.
Try and get rid of things first. Don't automate garbage
Yeah,
or
yeah,
things
yeah.
that aren't adding value. You always start with what is effective. What is the work that you can do that's the most effective? Forget about efficiency, forget about productivity, but like what is going to add the most value? Identify that first. Then you can work on getting more efficient, then you can work on automation, and then you can crank up and produce more of it. But
Yeah.
you always want to start with, and it goes back, you talked a little bit about this earlier, what are the vital few? What is the most effective thing that's going to have the biggest, when I think of effectiveness, I think of terms in terms of value and purpose. Is the thing that I'm doing, like, what is it doing? It's answering the question, what is this actually doing? And is this thing fit for its intended purpose?
Yeah.
Focus on that first.
Yeah.
Automation is the last thing you want to do, because once you automate, now it gets more difficult and more expensive to adjust. that's a
Yeah.
whole other topic too.
Good point. All right,
All right.
Brian.
Longest stand up yet. We're going to end just short of 20 minutes. Have a good weekend,
Yeah.
everybody.
Good talking, Brian. Take care.